name is Naomi Interview. I work with the Department of Defense Early Intervention Part C programs as the Comprehensive System of Personnel Development Coordinator. I also work with the Air Force and the Navy branches of the military and their early intervention programs as we are working together in partnership to advance our practices and uniform our practices across the services. In addition to that, I also am an adjunct instructor with Central Texas European Campus in their early childhood program, so teach a variety of different courses in early childhood. And then I am a consultant, early childhood consultant on the side as well, and have worked with different states and different programs in helping to build and enhance their programs, primarily around child outcomes, around early intervention practices and preschool practices. I have to say that I think the field of early intervention and early childhood special education is so exciting, and with the advances in technology, I think we're really starting to see much more sharing, much more learning from each other, and with that I think comes the growth of so many more resources and products that can be used, where I think years ago, and even not so long ago, everybody was kind of doing their own thing. And now I think we're really coming together. I think the publication of the new DEC recommended practices is another key component that's going to be really valuable for early childhood special education. One of the things I think I'm most excited about with that is that the whole strand on families, that families are really integrated into the DEC recommended practices. Well, I guess the other part that is exciting is the early intervention universal curriculum that myself and some colleagues are developing. It is all going to be online. The first one that we've done is on the 7 key principles and practices, and the curriculum is available online, free for anybody's use. It's got embedded videos along with it, and it's a nice, rich overview and even some further in-depth information about the 7 key principles and practices. The other is a book that I've recently co-authored. Linda Fletcher is the first author, and we wrote a book. It's the Early Intervention Workbook, which really is a compilation of it's basing on the 7 key principles and practices. It talks about the foundational pillars of early intervention and goes through the process of early intervention, along with some scenarios and what I call discussion starters and those types of things. I think part of it is having them integrated into the program policies and framework. As a foundational level, I think if we're just trying to implement them on the practice end, but they're not attached to our policies, to our practices, our expectations of what providers are doing, then there's sort of a missed link there. So I think that's an important piece. I think sometimes too we have to put things into smaller chunks so that they can be understandable. I think about, we're going to talk later about some work with the routines-based interview and even with the cost process, and they're both very complex. So being able to really look at what are those key elements that are included in different practices, whether it be the cost, the routines-based interview, Robin's routines-based interview, or another key practice, but to break them down into little chunks that we can really help providers, teachers know these are the pieces that we expect. I think like home visiting is pretty complex, right? And to say, well, these are all the things that we want to see happen, and then we want to hold teachers or providers accountable to those, but yet have we really broken those down into the tangible pieces that really help people to know what are those and what are they not? I think the advances of video and being able to use video is powerful as well. Even if it's just, even if it's nobody watching this video and it's just you, it's a valuable opportunity to look at that and reflect back on, what were those things that really worked well, and were there missed opportunities. I think because families know their children best. They truly do, and we really have to respect that. We certainly, as providers, have the very best interest of children in mind, but without that partnership, we can run the risk of misinterpretations, misassumptions that really then begin to impede that relationship. We know that families have the greatest and the longest lasting impact and influence on their children. And we really have to be able to partner with families in order to capitalize on that aspect. Otherwise, it's kind of like we might end up going not necessarily different directions, but not the same pace, the same direction at the same time. That partnership and being able to work together is key for that. I have to take a pause and see if there was something else. We know general development. And have a lot to contribute to that partnership as well, but the family really knows their child better than anybody. And as much that we know about general child development, that alone isn't going to really help us with that individual child and that family knowing all of the nuances of what he or she does or doesn't do in the context of day-to-day life, and where they've been and where they want to go. I think it's because families know their children best. And I said it before, I think it's because they have the greatest and the longest lasting impact and influence on their children. And we're really amiss if we're not partnering with families. We can do more together than we can apart. And we really have to be respectful of all that the family does and all that they know about their child, and also what their priorities are, to make sure that we are moving forward in the direction that's most meaningful for the child and for the family. If we truly believe in full partnership with families, we take every opportunity to have those open and honest conversations with families. One of the things that I like to encourage is to practice transparency, to be very open, to be very honest with families. A colleague once told me that every meeting or every conversation that we're having about a child should be done as if the parent is sitting right there. And I think we have to be mindful of our own actions, because sometimes it can be easy to slip into the talking about families instead of talking with families. I think that's an important piece to be mindful of our own behaviors and practices, and also to help our colleagues with that as well. So I think it's wondering with families, not wondering about families. It's okay to not know something. It's best to ask. If we don't know, we don't want to run the risk of jumping to assumptions or misinterpretations. I think of a scenario that a colleague of mine shared one time, and how the child had a different last name than the parents. And they kind of wondered about it, but didn't ask, and then time went on to the point that it was a little bit awkward to ask the question, because now they've been working with the family for quite some time. And while that might seem sort of minor, you think about how all of those things, how those little things can add up over time, and it can really impede that relationship, because we start running those assumptions or those misinterpretations and trying to conjecture, well, what does this mean, or what does that? And if we would have just asked the question up front, so those times that we wonder, to be able to reflect and say, well, how can I find that information out? Is that information really meaningful? So that open, honest communication with families, that being transparent about the process and the things that you're wondering about or seeing is so, so important for building that relationship. And I think one of the other aspects of that is being able to have that conversation with families as they are making that transition. What have been the ways that you've stayed in contact or communicated that's worked for you in early intervention? How can we employ that as the child is moving into preschool? Sometimes that one-way-fits-all doesn't work. Well, we give you a notebook, but what if this family isn't a family that reads or that has time for the notebook? So I think we need to be able to, just like we individualize for children, to individualize for families and find out what works best. To ask them, what is the best way for us to stay in contact? Is it email? Is it texting? Is it, whatever it might be? I think there's a lot of different options now. And we really have to make the point to make those connections with families, not just in early intervention and preschool as well. Again, I go back to that, it's the family's child. We need to partner with them. They have to be part of it in order for us to really be able to effectively move forward together. First is open, honest communication, taking the time to really listen to families. And I mean really listen to families. We can say, oh, I'm an active listener, I'm really good at that. But it really isn't that easy. We really have to make the point to actively listen, which means abandoning our agendas, which means not having to think about, not getting caught up in thinking about what is the next question I want to ask, but being able to be there in the moment with the family and really listening to what it is they have to share. Asking open-ended questions really does allow families to share the information that they want to share, versus sometimes a list of closed-ended questions. We're asking information that maybe the family doesn't want to share. So the open-ended questions are critically important. To understand about their family routines and day-to-day activities and what happens, asking the question, getting a sense of what is a typical day like. Personally, I like the Robbins routines-based interview. I think it's a powerful tool for really getting to know what it is that the family has for priorities for their family, for their child. It's a powerful tool for building that relationship with families, which we know is critically important. If we don't have a good relationship, a good partnership with families, we run the risk of not ending up not going in the same direction with the families, not being on the same page. It's taking that time to really listen, to actively engage families versus passively expecting that they're engaged. And it's our actions, and to be able to reflect on what are our actions, what did I do that really helped to engage the family, or what is it with another family that we don't have that connection. So that reflection time and looking at my own, looking inside is powerful and helpful for building that relationship. I mean, and it's the whole relationship, and it's not just them. I have something to contribute and bring to this relationship, and if it's not working, I shouldn't just point my finger at the family, but to really look and say, what is my contribution to this relationship? What is it that I've done or not done that has influenced the relationship? And then again, that practice transparency. If I think that this relationship is a little bit rocky, why not have that conversation with the family instead of wondering or assuming or running into all of those misinterpretations, which really does impede the quality of the relationship. So ask the questions, have that open, honest conversation with families. Let them know, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Check in. Yeah. Some of the obstacles, and these are probably not unique to me, it's time and paperwork. It's, in preschool oftentimes there's this much time for the meeting, and there's all this paperwork that has to be completed. Sometimes that runs in the way. And one of the things I think with the paperwork is we really have to look at, is our paperwork, and it's critically important. We've got to have the documentation. We've got to make sure that our policies and our practices are being implemented in accordance with the regulations. All of that has to be in place. But sometimes what happens, I think, is that the paperwork starts to drive the process instead of guide the process. So being able to look at our paperwork and say, does our paperwork really reflect the family-centered philosophy that we want it to? Are there questions that are asked that don't need to be asked? I think about years ago we had a child development questionnaire that we completed, and it had questions like, was this a planned pregnancy? Have you had any miscarriages or abortions? I mean, what on earth were we thinking? And again, we learn from the past, and we don't ask those questions anymore, nor should we have asked them back then. But we really have to take a look at our paperwork and our policies and our practices, and are they really supporting our belief and the philosophy of family-centered practices? And are they helping to guide that relationship? Or is it really just, hey, we've got to get this paperwork done. We've got this much time for this meeting. We need to find a way to make the time to listen to families, to let families share their stories, because that's how we can really get to know them, what their priorities are, what their child's strengths and needs are, within the context of the things that happen day to day. I think sometimes we get hung up in the regulations and, we have to have this, we have to have this. And we may have to have that, but doesn't have to be another form that needs to be completed in order to have that. It's easy when, somebody comes and monitors and, this wasn't in place, well, let's create a form for it. We really need to think about, is that really what's needed, or can that be captured in another way? And in some cases, it might very well be needed. In other cases, I think we've already captured that. The whole paperwork thing can be challenging. It has to be there. It's sort of a double-edged, we've got to have it, but yet it can be something that can guide the process. It can be something that can help to build that partnership. It doesn't have to be all of this, 4-point font that describes all of this legalese. We can write it in language that makes sense for all of us. We can provide examples of, what it means, what it doesn't mean. We just have to be, I think we have to be mindful and do that check of our documentation and such to be sure, does it really reinforce and facilitate that relationship and that partnership, or does it hinder it? I guess the other one with that one was sometimes those hard to reach families can be challenging. And I think one of the most important things with that is to recognize that not all families are the same, and to recognize too that families' lives are very complex, and that we're meeting them at a time that's pretty vulnerable for them. This is the first time that their baby's getting started with special education. It can be a trying time. So to be mindful of that and being empathetic in understanding where the family's coming from. And again, that whole notion of, what am I contributing to this relationship? Some I have, some I haven't. Some will continue. I think the recognizing that the time you spend talking with families, getting to know families, is time very, very, very well spent. Sometimes it means revamping the paperwork. I have had the opportunity to revamp paperwork, and I think it's an important thing to do, and I think it's important to look at that and our policies and our regulations in light of family-centered practices, in light of building those partnerships with families, and also getting family input as part of that. Does this make sense? We really want the paperwork to guide the process, and I truly believe it can, versus drive the process. Then it becomes frustrating for providers to fill out the paperwork, for parents to be part of filling out that paperwork. But if it guides the process, then it can be very, very helpful in helping to facilitate that relationship and making sure that all of the right pieces are in place. The other piece to that is taking the time to listen and finding the balance.
Okay.
finding that balance between everything. And I don't know that there's a really easy answer to that. Everybody's got their own different time management strategies, but finding the balance is important. I wouldn't like to think of families as an obstacle. I think I'd rather, what is it that's the challenge? It might be that, wow, they're just not returning calls. It might be that they missed this appointment or that appointment. And be very careful not to point the finger to the family didn't this, the family didn't that. But again, to say, what did I contribute to this? What else might be going on? And not to try to run up a whole list of assumptions of what might be going on, but to get back together with the family, to be able to share that. It seems like we've missed a lot of you've missed a lot of appointments, and to have that conversation with the families to find out is this are they still invested in moving forward? What else might be going on in their lives that maybe even though I might not think that we need to take a pause in the process, maybe they do. And to be respectful of that, I think, is an important piece. We have to be cautious of that, and I think it does take a lot of self-reflection. It's easy to slip back into, well, the family, they didn't show up again. They're really not invested. They're not interested in their child, which certainly goes against one of the key principles and practices that we talked about, was that all families have the very best interest in their children. We have to recognize the complexities of what's happening in their lives, the priorities, the situations. Think about our own lives and all of the ups and downs that happen. Life is challenging, and just because somebody else wants you to do something doesn't mean that you can drop everything and do that. When there's issues of abuse or neglect, then it's a little bit different. Then we do have to make the appropriate referrals and bring that forward. So I think we have to be aware of that as well. But the family that missed an appointment, or let's find out what's going on and how we can move forward together, assuming that that's what they want to do at this point. So let me go back to, how do children learn? Children learn when they're actively engaged in developmentally appropriate activities that happen day in and day out, that are meaningful for them and meaningful for their families. The power and the richness of what happens day to day is so much of what children learn. So if I'm thinking that my intervention with this child is so important, it's such a tiny little chunk out of that child's life. Families are the ones that really do have the greatest and longest lasting impact on their children's development. It behooves us to partner with families and to work together. Yeah, it doesn't mean that we're just going to sit back and ask questions. We've got to share some information. It's a partnership. It's not, I'm just here to ask you questions. But it is being respectful of the relationship. It's being respectful of what families know and what families do. It's starting on a page where we can start at the same place and move forward. It's all of those pieces. And it's recognizing principles of adult learning and different learning styles, and to respect parents as peers. That parents are peers with us. I'm not the professional that has all the knowledge. When we think about it, they have so much knowledge about their child. Again, we know general development, and very specialized general development in some cases, depending upon our area of discipline. But we have to respect parents as peers in this process together. We need to respect parents as adult learners. We need to meet parents where it is that they're at, figure out how we're going to move forward together, and address the priorities that they have. And that doesn't mean we're just going to sit back and wait until they tell us. We have a great deal of knowledge about child growth and development that we need to share so that together families can make informed decisions, and together we can help the child be as successful as he or she can. I think 3 points. Well, probably several more, but 3 come to mind. Being respectful of what families know and what families do. Being transparent in the process, to share information, to work together, to wonder with families, not about families. And then keeping family at the heart of everything that we do.